There's a kind of harm that doesn't leave bruises, a kind of pain you can't see in medical reports, but it silently builds the emotional foundation of a person raised under the shadow of toxic parents. When we're kids, our brains are still being shaped, and unlike what many people think, it's not only food, shelter, or clothes that form us, it's the bond. That emotional connection is what truly raises a child. But when that bond becomes unstable, manipulative, careless, or emotionally absent, it doesn't just create a tough childhood, it leaves behind an invisible wound, one that quietly follows the person into adulthood. The British psychiatrist John Bowlby, who developed the famous attachment theory, discovered something deeply unsettling. The way our caregivers treat us during our first years of life shapes how we see ourselves, how we see others, and how we see the world. And this isn't just poetic language, it's literally written into our nervous system. Parents who should have been our safe place often end up becoming a source of fear and stress when love is given one moment and taken away the next. When it's mixed with rejection, coldness, or control, the child learns a painful rule: that love must be earned, that affection isn't freely given, that to be accepted they must please, hide their feelings, and constantly try not to upset anyone. This teaches them that love is something unstable and unpredictable. Bowlby called this emotional pattern anxious ambivalent attachment, a way of relating that grows from deep insecurity, fear of rejection, and a constant hunger for approval. These children grow up believing love and anxiety go hand in hand. They learn that closeness always comes with worry, that affection means losing yourself to keep someone else happy. And this emotional script gets carried into every stage of life, into friendships, schools, jobs, and especially romantic relationships. What's even sadder is that most people who grew up like this don't even realize they were emotionally abused. They were told they had everything: a home, food, parents who did their best. They were taught to feel guilty for feeling hurt. They were made to believe that their sadness was proof of being ungrateful. This confusion between love and suffering becomes the very reason the cycle never ends. Grown-ups who feel guilty for being unhappy don't understand that their unhappiness is a leftover echo of a childhood filled with fear. This discussion is about that silent reality, one that many people never put into words. Using Bowlby's theory and modern psychology, we'll see how toxic parents shape a child's emotional brain, how these emotional programs carry over into adult life, and most importantly, how they can be changed. Because the pain you feel today is not a sign of weakness, it's a signal. It is a leftover reaction from something that started a long time ago and now needs to be understood. Not every toxic parent yells, humiliates, or hits. Sometimes, the harm is quiet. It hides in the everyday moments. A toxic parent might never raise their voice, but can still make their child feel unseen, unheard, and unwanted. It could be a mother who says it's for your own good, while emotionally controlling every choice. Or a father who thinks being strict means showing no warmth. Or someone who mistakes control for care, fear for respect, and dependence for love. Toxic parenting usually doesn't appear through extreme cruelty, it's in the small, daily actions. In every ignored emotion, every disappointed look, every cold response that makes a child doubt their worth. A toxic parent doesn't have to be openly harsh to cause harm. It's enough to be unpredictable. One day they hug you, the next day they act like you don't exist. A child, unable to make sense of these mixed signals, naturally starts blaming themselves. They start thinking, I must have done something wrong. And that's where the trap begins. What should have been a place of comfort turns into a place of constant fear. From then on, the child starts studying everything: the tone of a voice, the expression on a face, the sound of footsteps, trying to predict danger before it happens. They learn to adapt, to shrink themselves, to stop being who they are, just to avoid rejection. This becomes their version of love. What most people don't realize is that toxic parenting is almost always a continuation of something older. Many toxic parents are acting out their own unhealed wounds. A mother who smothers her child with control might have grown up neglected and confused control with care. A father who is angry and intimidating may have once been a scared little boy, trying to survive under someone else's anger. So, the pattern repeats. Trauma becomes tradition, passed silently from one generation to the next. And here's the most tragic part. Children, even when deeply hurt, still love their parents. That love is unconditional. It's built into them. But that's also what makes them so defenseless. When love gets mixed with fear, the brain learns a dangerous rule about the world, that the people you love are also the ones who can hurt you the most. And this rule stays. It becomes the root of lifelong emotional struggles, chronic anxiety, constant guilt, low self-esteem, and the endless feeling of not being enough. Bowlby found that humans are born wired to seek safety and comfort from the people raising them. When that emotional safety is broken by rejection, indifference, or abuse, the system inside us that controls our sense of stability collapses. The child's body starts living in constant alert, as if love could disappear at any second. That kind of stress response, which should only last for moments in emergencies, becomes permanent. The body stays stuck in survival mode, and love becomes a source of fear. Toxic parents raise children who grow up too fast. These kids learn to sense danger early. They become experts in reading people's moods, fixing other people's problems, calming down angry adults, and hiding their real emotions. They end up being the caretakers of the people who were supposed to take care of them. And to survive that role reversal, they learn to erase their true selves. Psychologically, this is a kind of disappearance. They learn that being themselves isn't safe. But the damage doesn't end with their behavior, it's built deeper inside the mind. Bowlby called it the internal working model. It's like a hidden blueprint that shapes how a person sees life, themselves, and others. And when that blueprint is drawn in a toxic environment, it becomes twisted and painful. This unconscious mental map controls how people interpret everything, even without realizing it. It's this psychological mold created from pain that continues guiding their relationships and decisions as adults. And understanding this inner map is the first real step toward breaking free from the pattern. Because when you see the map, you can finally start to redraw it. Think of a child's mind as a blank sheet of paper. Every reaction from their parents, every smile, every insult, every ignored moment writes something on that paper. Slowly, it becomes an invisible instruction book for how life works. This hidden instruction book is what Bowlby called the internal working model. It's the subconscious script that shapes how someone sees themselves, how they see others, and how they expect relationships to feel. This model doesn't come from logical thinking, it grows from repeated emotional experiences. A child doesn't think, "My parents are emotionally unstable, so I can't trust them." Instead, they feel, "Something must be wrong with me. That's why I'm not loved the way I need to be." That feeling builds the foundation of who they think they are. Toxic parents teach their kids that love must be earned. It's not freely given, it's something you work for. The child starts believing they must be perfect, quiet, or invisible to be accepted. They learn not to make mistakes, not to speak up, not to show emotion. And when they do file us, every human does, they turn the anger inward. They punish themselves. Because deep down, the rule has already been written. If I'm not loved, it must be my fault. The most dangerous part of this mental pattern is that it works automatically. It becomes the emotional background of life. Even when the person grows up and leaves home, this script still runs quietly in the background. That's why a small criticism at work can feel like a huge attack. Why a simple ignored message feels like rejection. Why failing once feels like proof that they're worthless. The same internal model also decides how they handle emotions. If they were scolded for crying, they learn to hide sadness. If fear was ignored, they learn to fake being strong. If anger was mocked, they learn to bury it until it bursts out uncontrollably. So they grow into adults who look calm and confident but feel broken inside. They carry an image of control while drowning emotionally. Bowlby explained that this inner model helps us predict and respond to people who matter to us. But if those early people were toxic, then the predictions become warped. They start believing, People will always leave me. I don't deserve love. If I relax, I'll get hurt. And sadly, these beliefs keep proving themselves true, not because they're reality, but because the person subconsciously acts in ways that recreate them. They choose partners who confirm their fears, jobs that feed their anxiety, friends who don't show up. It becomes a self-fulfilling cycle of pain. And here's the cruelest twist. This emotional pattern feels normal. It feels familiar, even when it's destroying them. Healthy, emotionally stable people might feel boring. Quiet moments can make them nervous. Calmness feels suspicious. And chaos, no matter how painful, feels strangely safe, because it's what they've always known. But here's the truth. If this model was built through painful experiences, it can be rebuilt through awareness and new experiences too. The brain is adaptable, and the emotional script can be written. But before healing starts, one must understand where the foundation came from. And that foundation, in many cases, is anxious ambivalent attachment, the emotional pattern born when love and fear come from the same place. What happens when the only person who is supposed to protect you is also the one you fear? That's the heart of anxious ambivalent attachment. It's an emotional trap that forms when parents, instead of being consistent and supportive, become unpredictable and unstable. One day, they're warm and proud. The next, they're cold, mocking, or punishing without reason. One day you're loved, the next you're unwanted. The child's mind doesn't know how to process that, so the emotional system goes into confusion. Instead of learning that the world is stable and safe, the child learns that love is temporary, something that can vanish at any moment. Every bit of affection comes with the fear that it will disappear. Every hug comes with tension, waiting for it to end. Bowlby found that this kind of attachment trains the child's nervous system to stay on high alert. They become hyper-aware of everything: the look on someone's face, the tone of voice, the pause before a response. They live trying to predict when love will be taken away. This isn't just a mental state, it's a physical one. Their bodies literally get stuck in an anxious pattern. The presence of the parent doesn't calm them, because that presence is unpredictable. Instead, the child stays tense, always bracing for the next emotional hit. So even love feels like stress. And when these children grow up, the pattern stays. Adults with anxious ambivalent attachment feel insecure in almost every relationship. No matter how much love they receive, it never feels like enough. They constantly fear being left behind or betrayed. They crave closeness, but also fear the pain that closeness might bring. So they repeat the same exhausting cycle of pulling people close and then pushing them away. This is the only way their brain knows to handle love, because it asks the way it learned love worked. People who grew up like this end up believing deep down that they always have to work too hard to be loved, that love and fear are somehow connected. They struggle to trust. They are overwhelmed by feelings of inadequacy, shame, and guilt. Even when everything seems to be going well, emotional peace feels uncomfortable. Stability sounds false, and, as paradoxical as it may seem, constant. Anxiety becomes a type of normality. The cruelest aspect of this pattern is that it becomes the person feeling insecure may become excessively demanding, jealous, dependent, or emotionally reactive, which in turn generates distance in relationships. This distance validates their unconscious belief that they will always be rejected, abandoned, or ignored. It is a loop of pain that reinforces the original programming created in childhood. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of anxious attachment is this: even when the individual finds someone emotionally stable, loving, and secure, they do not feel chemistry. The nervous system, programmed to associate love with anxiety, does not recognize safety as something familiar. And that is where a new type of suffering begins. Rejecting what is good and desiring what hurts. This inversion of perception, where the healthy seems boring and the toxic seems passionate, is a direct result of childhood conditioning. It is the emotional brain trying to recreate the parental pattern in the unconscious hope of correcting the past. But the past cannot be corrected through repetition. It is corrected through awareness. In the next part, we will understand how this pattern continues to manifest in adulthood, even when the person believes they have already overcome childhood, because the effects of toxic parents do not disappear over time. They infiltrate decisions, emotions, and the most important relationships in life. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Most people believe that as they grow up, they become free from their parents' influence. After all, they now have control over their decisions, their routines, their lives. But what psychology proves, and life confirms, is that growing up with toxic parents is not something that can be left behind. It is not just an uncomfortable memory, but a psychological mold that continues to operate silently, day after day, influencing everything. The way a person sees themselves, how they feel, how they react, how they relate, and even how they think. The adult who was raised by emotionally unstable or abusive parents carries a series of patterns that do not seem, at first glance, to be related to childhood. But they are the incessant self-criticism, the difficulty in making decisions, the tendency to apologize all the time, the fear of expressing opinions, the feeling of inadequacy in social settings, the chronic sense of being a burden. All of these are marks left by a past where love was conditional, unpredictable, or non-existent. Often, these individuals do not even realize that something is wrong. They think they are too sensitive, too intense, too complicated. They have internalized the idea that they are the problem. An idea instilled by years of emotional invalidation. When they cried, they heard, "Stop the drama." When they expressed anger, they were called ungrateful. When they asked for attention, they received silence. Gradually, they learned not to trust their own feelings. And when a person loses the right to trust what they feel, they lose connection with who they are. Bowlby described how, over the years, the attachment model becomes the primary lens of reality perception. This means that a person raised in emotional instability can spend years repeating destructive patterns without even knowing why. They may shy away from opportunities for fear of failure. They may avoid deep relationships for fear of getting hurt. They may pursue unattainable goals in an attempt to feel valid. All of this is guided by an emotional programming created even before they were aware of themselves. Furthermore, toxic parents often instill a type of dysfunctional loyalty. The child learns that questioning their parents' behavior is They grow up believing that suffering is the price of love. And as adults, they feel guilty when distancing themselves, when setting boundaries, when saying no. That is why so many people remain emotionally tied to abusive parents. Not out of love, but due to a system of psychic obedience, based on fear and conditioning. This emotional prison also affects how the adult treats themselves. The person who grew up being constantly criticized, learns to criticize themselves. The one who was ignored, learns to ignore their own needs. The one who was manipulated learns to doubt their own decisions. Essentially, the adult becomes their own tormentor, perpetuating internally what they suffered externally. And the cruelest part, often without even realizing it. But there is good news, and Bowlby was clear in stating this. The attachment pattern, although powerful, is not permanent. It can be transformed. And the first step towards that is what psychology calls earned secure attachment, a form of healing that requires awareness, effort, and above all, the courage to break old conditioning. In the next part, we will explore how it is possible to build this emotional security, even if you have never experienced it in childhood. We will understand how to reprogram the nervous system, break inherited patterns, and finally start writing a new story. A story where love is not anxiety, but refuge. Earned secure attachment. Reprogramming love. Many adults who grew up with toxic parents spend years believing that something inside them is broken, that they are emotionally dysfunctional by nature, and that they will never truly feel safe, loved, or at peace. But Bowlby offers a profoundly transformative perspective. Attachment patterns are not definitive sentences. They are Even if childhood has left deep scars, it is possible, through conscious effort and emotional restructuring, to build what he called earned secure attachment. The earned secure attachment. But what does this really mean, and why is it so difficult to achieve? Secure attachment is not just feeling good in a relationship. It is an internal state of emotional stability. It is knowing, even in moments of pain, that you are worthy of care. It is trusting yourself, recognizing your emotions without fear, setting boundaries without guilt. For those raised in unstable homes, this type of security feels strange, almost threatening. The nervous system has been programmed to associate love with tension, attention with NP predictability, and affection with the imminent risk of rejection. That is why the first step to achieving secure attachment is to recognize that your body may be stuck in a past that your mind has already overcome. You may rationally know that your parents were abusive, you may have read books, gone to therapy, watched videos like this one, but if your nervous system is still operating in alert mode, you will continue to react to situations as if you were still in that dysfunctional environment. This explains why you sabotage yourself when everything is going well, why you feel anxious when praised, why you distrust when someone is kind to you. Reprogramming begins with awareness, noticing triggers, identifying when a disproportionate emotional reaction is being activated by an old wound, understanding that not every current rejection is real, some are just echoes of the past. This is the hardest part, because it requires presence. An emotional presence is exactly what has been denied to you for so many years. Next, you need to learn to tolerate what once seemed unbearable: stability. For those who lived on an emotional roller coaster, a healthy relationship may seem boring. A true friendship may feel uncomfortable. A moment of peace may sound like boredom. This happens because the nervous system has been conditioned to function in a high state of excitement, and emotional security, paradoxically, generates restlessness. This is where practice comes in. Repetition, creating new, safe, emotional experiences, even if small. Being with people who validate your emotions, saying no without justifying yourself, accepting help without feeling indebted, allowing yourself to fail without sinking into shame. Each of these experiences, no matter how simple it may seem, is a message you send to your brain: I am safe now. Over time, these experiences will shape a new internal model, no longer based on fear, but on trust. Bowlby emphasized that healing happens in corrective relationships, bonds, where a person can, for the first time, experience what they should have received in childhood: constant presence, true empathy, emotional acceptance. These bonds can happen in therapy, in deep friendships, in mature romantic relationships, or even in contact with oneself through self-observation and self-compassion. But achieving this new pattern also requires a difficult choice: breaking loyalty to the old. This means stopping blaming yourself for distancing from toxic parents. It means accepting that you no longer need to prove anything to be loved, that you can be whole, even without the approval of those who hurt you. And this is perhaps the most liberating part of the entire process: realizing that you can be the caregiver you never had, that within you lies the capacity to embrace, protect, and guide yourself. It is not easy, it is not quick, but it is possible, and it starts with an act of rebellion, refusing to repeat pain as destiny. In the next and final part, we will talk about this, about how breaking this cycle is not ingratitude, weakness, or selfishness, but rather an act of emotional survival. Because healing only becomes complete when you understand that you deserve a different kind of love. Not the love you were given, but the love that has always been missing. Breaking the cycle of toxic parents is one of the hardest decisions someone can make, not only because it involves confronting figures who should have been sources of love and protection, but because it goes against everything that was taught from an early age: that you must be loyal above all, that talking about what happened is exaggeration, that questioning your parents' behavior is a sign of but the truth is harsh and liberating. Staying trapped in abusive bonds is not love. It is self-destruction. For years, you may have tried to fix the relationship. You may have strived to please, to explain your feelings, to be understood. And when nothing changed, you blamed yourself. You thought you were too sensitive, too ungrateful, too difficult. But the problem was never you. The problem was growing up in an environment where your emotional needs were not seen, or worse, were distorted and punished. Toxic parents often use guilt as a tool for control. They say things like, I did everything for you. You were a difficult child. If I was tough, it was for your own good. But pain does not lie, and when you start to recognize your pain as legitimate, the process of liberation begins. Because no one should spend their life trying to convince their own parents that they deserve to be loved. Breaking the cycle does not necessarily mean cutting off contact, although sometimes that is necessary. Breaking the cycle means putting an end to the emotional legacy that destroys generations. It means choosing yourself, setting boundaries, saying enough to the role of eternal scapegoat, claiming the right to be treated with respect, even by those who brought you into the world. And most importantly, it means rebuilding an identity outside of their shadow. It is common for this process to be accompanied by loneliness, confusion, and even grief. After all, you are not just breaking a relationship, you are bearing the hope that one day these parents will become what you always needed. And that hurts, but it also heals. Because in place of illusion, the real possibility of building something new is born. A life where you do not have to prove yourself all the time, where love does not hurt, where emotional peace is not confused with apathy. You owe nothing to those who violated your emotional safety. The greatest form of gratitude you can offer to life is to heal. To live an existence where trauma is no longer your master, but rather your starting point, where your story does not end as it began. That is courage. That is dignity.